What's up, Scyushi Squad? We are back again with more Genshin Impact. Yes, finally. It's been a while since we ended up covering anything on Genshin. Most of all, just because I'm waiting for the new update. But today's video is going to be focusing on Heizou, which is going to end up being a new 4-star Catalyst user that punches things. He uses his fists. He's going to basically be Avatar the Last Airbender. For those of you that just want the information, there's the card. There will be a link in the description where you can end up downloading it. That's all of the stuff that you're going to end up needing in order to level this guy up. And then for everybody else, let's get into it. So another thing I wanted to mention is there's a reason that we're chilling on Kazuha. That's because Heizou is going to end up being part of Kazuha's banner. Yes, that's right. Kazuha is going to end up having a rerun along with Klee. That's going to end up being phase 1, and then phase 2 is going to end up being a rerun of Yoimiya. And if I'm correct about this, the update should arrive July 12th. Now, keep in mind, guys, you might want to end up saving your Prima Gems just because apparently the update after 2.8 is going to skip right into Sumeru. And we did end up actually having a short preview on the Genshin live stream that did end up showing some Sumeru assets and stuff and ended up hinting towards the Sumeru god. So we will briefly mention that his normal attacks, usually we end up skipping over normal attacks on most characters. But in this case, I did want to mention that he'll perform 5 fist cuffin powered by the mighty winds, blah, blah, blah. He basically deals Anemo damage as his base damage, the same as any Catalyst user. It's just the difference, of course, is that he is up in their face and he is going to be using his fist, which I think is really cool. And then his charge attack is going to perform a sweeping kick that deals Anemo damage. And then there's going to end up being his E ability or his elemental skill, which is it's got a tap and a hold version of it, as well as some sort of a passive, which we'll end up getting into. So the tap wields the swift winds to launch a Heartstopper strike that deals Anemo damage. The hold charges energy to unleash an even stronger blow. He will obtain the declension effect while charging, which will increase the power of the Heartstopper strike when the strike or when the skill button is released or the skill finishes charging. He will strike forward, dealing Anemo damage. I'm sorry I'm reading it so weird. It's just typed out very strangely. But the declension effect is going to be that it increases the power of the next Heartstopper strike. Max stacks is 4, and when you possess 4 declension at stacks, the conviction effect will be produced, which will cause the next Heartstopper strike to be even stronger and have a larger area of effect. But basically, it seems like you're going to end up using the charge attack is going to end up making the next attack stronger, even if you end up doing a tap. And then there's going to end up being his ultimate ability, which doesn't really end up having any fancy like camera angles zooming in on your face or anything, because of course he's a 4-star character and not a 5-star character. However, I have seen this attack slap, and I've heard from people that you can actually get Heizou to end up attacking up to like 80 to 90k, so he'll probably end up being a pretty good DPS character. But anyways, the Windmuster kick. So he leaps into the air and uses Fudo-style Vacuum Slugger, cool, and kicks his opponents. The Vacuum Slugger will explode upon hit and create an arresting wind tunnel that pulls in nearby objects and opponents, dealing area of effect Anemo damage, which is pretty dang cool. So it's basically going to end up being like a Kazuha ability or a Venti ult that vacuums everything in, but he basically kicks a giant soccer ball made of Anemo, hence in short. When Vacuum Slugger hits opponents affected by Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro, get ready for this, these opponents will be afflicted with Windmuster Iris. The Windmuster Iris will explode after a moment and dissipate, dealing area of effect damage of the corresponding aforementioned elemental type. So what that means is basically you're going to end up kicking the attack. It's going to land on enemies and deal Anemo damage, and then a brief second after, it's going to end up causing the reactive damage of the element that is currently applied to those enemies, which is pretty crazy. That means you could end up using it to reset elemental attacks on enemies. You know, you could tag them with water or something, and then it's about to wear out. You tag them with water again or what have you, and just lots and lots of damage go burr. Vacuum Slugger can afflict a maximum of 4 opponents with the Windmuster Iris. A single opponent cannot be under the effect of Windmuster Irises of different elements at the same time. So again, I want to reiterate, It's just going to end up hitting the enemy with the element that they already have afflicted on them. So you aren't going to be able to do reactive damage, essentially. Like if an enemy is tagged with water and you want to hit it with fire, you're not going to be able to do that with Heizou. You'll basically have to end up still continually tagging it with an actual fire character, but it means that you could end up changing the reactions and stuff a little bit. I don't know. It's generally going to end up being really supportive in the fact that it's going to reapply the effect to enemies. So moving on to his passive talents, he's got decreased sprinting stamina consumption for your party members by 20%. It's not stackable passive with others of the same effect, and it also seems to specifically say your own party members, so I assume when you're in co-op it doesn't end up affecting everybody. I don't know, that could be misinformation, but either way, then there's gonna end up being when Shikanoin Heizou, that's just his full name, activates a swirl reaction while on the field, he will gain 1 declension stack for Heartstopper Strike. This effect can be triggered every 0.1 seconds. So essentially, instead of even bothering with his hold on his E, you would just tag enemies with Anemo, and so long as you end up triggering swirl, you'll slowly end up building up the declension stacks, and then you could just use a free tap of your E that would end up using all of them at once. I think that's how it's going to end up working, which is pretty dang cool. And then after Heizou's Heartstopper Strike hits an opponent, which is going to end up being his E ability, it will increase all party members, excluding Heizou himself, elemental mastery by 80 for 10 seconds, which is pretty good. Most of all, that's going to end up helping with reactions, obviously. And then we move on to the Constellations. So his C1 is going to be for 5 seconds after Heizou takes the field. His normal attack speed is increased by 15%. He also gains 1 declension stack for Heartstopper Strike. This effect can be triggered once every 10 seconds. That's actually pretty crazy. His C2, the pull effect of his ultimate ability is enhanced, and its duration is increased by 1 second. So it'll pull enemies in for a longer period of time, which is really, really cool. His C3 obviously makes it so that his E ability ends up gaining 3 additional levels. His C4 is the first Windmuster Iris Explosion. In each Windmuster kick will regenerate 9 elemental energy for Heizou. Every subsequent explosion in that Windmuster kick will each regenerate an additional 1.5 energy for Heizou. 1 Windmuster kick can regenerate a total of 13.5 energy for Heizou in this manner. So I guess it can trigger multiple explosions, or they're talking about using multiple ults. Without seeing him in game, I can't confirm 100% because we're just kind of going based off of the writing. And then of course his C5 is just making his ult 3 levels higher, and then his C6, this is crazy, each declension stack will increase the crit rate of the Heartstopper Strike, his E, unleashed by 4%. So with a full 4 stack of it increasing by 4%, that's 16% extra crit rate just for nothing, basically. When Heizou possesses Conviction, this Heartstopper Strike's crit damage will be increased by 32%. So you basically want to end up doing a full charge attack, and then that'll end up, that base charge attack is going to end up increasing your crit hit, and then you'll end up gaining Conviction, which will end up increasing the crit damage, and so long as you can trigger Swirl quick enough or just do another charge attack, it should end up obtaining the same crit rate bonus as well as the crit damage. It's just that you have to have the 4 stack to complement that, which is pretty dang cool, man. So let's talk very briefly about his attributes, weapons, artifacts, and then his talents and the order that you'd level them. Let's just go to attributes. Generally speaking, I think that the build that I have on Kazuha is going to end up being very, very similar to how you would end up building Heizou, because generally speaking, I think he's going to end up being a damage character. Of course, you could end up using as a DPS support. I don't think he's going to end up being a support per se, like full on, just because his abilities don't seem to have that sort of muster to it. You could end up having your crit rate be slightly more increased while the crit damage is slightly lower, but generally speaking, you're going to end up building him quite similar. And then if we end up going to a catalyst so that we can end up taking a look at the weapon, generally speaking, I think that you could end up using a whole breadth of, you know, Catalyst on him, you could end up using energy recharge if you want. You could go for a crit damage one. Elemental mastery would end up scaling on him well. Attack percentage, I think, would probably end up being his best option, which of course is going to end up leaving quite a few different options, and then you just gotta kind of take care of the passive. But again, though, I would probably end up just using the Skyward Atlas just because it's the only one that I have, and otherwise beggars can't be choosers. You could end up going for the Catalyst in the Battle Pass. That would end up working very well. And then sometimes there's the one in the shop that ends up having crit damage as its subclass ability, or a sub ability, sorry. And I think that would end up working very well on him as well. Now, as far as artifacts are concerned, generally speaking, you'd probably want to actually use a full Vener set, just because the 4-piece buff is going to end up increasing swirl damage by 60%, decreasing opponent's elemental resistance to the element infused in the swirl by 40%, which would go hand in hand with how his ultimate ends up working, because he would basically tag an enemy, get the swirl to go off, then they would end up having the enemy's resistance lowered to the element that they're infused with and that swirl is reacting off of, and then his ultimate, a brief second after, would end up tagging the enemy with that very element. So I think Vener is going to end up being a must. You could end up building him similar to my Kazuha, where I've got 2-piece Vener and 2-piece Gladiator, but let's talk about the actual stats that you're going to be focusing on. Again, he's going to end up being a primary damage character, so you would have attack, crit rate, crit damage as your priorities. You know, obviously having defense and HP, you can't really pick and choose because they're so random. Elemental mastery, I would say, would be another one that you want to end up having on him if you can. As far as the artifact stats for the Sands, I'd recommend probably attack percentage, Anemo damage, and then either crit rate or crit damage. If you want to use him as full support, you would just end up probably swapping the attack percentage out for an elemental mastery. And I would still recommend that you keep the Anemo damage bonus or the crit damage, but oh, excuse me. Another weird thing that I'm curious about is you could do a weird complex build where you would end up having a different type of elemental damage bonus on him. Maybe his swirl would suck, but if you ended up having an enemy that had pyro tagged on them, maybe the after effect of his ultimate ability would end up tagging an enemy pretty well. So as far as his talent level ups, you know, priority is concerned, it depends. If you're doing support, I wouldn't recommend that you go for most of his normal attacks and stuff like that. Generally speaking, for me, I'd probably go for his E, maybe his ult as the primary, and then his normal attack last. Anyways, that's my 2 cents towards it, guys. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and if you did, smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel, and have a wonderful day. Looking forward to the new update, although I probably won't wish for him myself just because I'm completely free to play, which means I barely get any Prima Gems.